So this video will cover the digestive system, and this is going to be, the first term that we see is our mesentery. And keep in mind that mesentery, although on our models right now, none of them have it, but your lab manual, as seen here, has a structure that looks sort of like a meshy net with blood vessels running through it. And so what you need to imagine here is that there's this sheet that covers the top of these organs made of connective tissue, and it allows for blood vessels to innervate and serve these organs. And our next term are going to be exposed, so begins at the oral cavity. And so if you look here at the head model, right, we're looking at half the sagittal view here. And one of the first things you want to note are the glands that we have. So you'll notice that this one underneath the tongue is the sublingual gland. And this is going to be the submandibular gland because it's closer to the mandible. We also have our parotid gland, which is going to be next to the ear. And these glands are responsible for producing what we know as saliva, secreting water and mucus in different concentrations. The oral cavity's function is to ingest nutrition, and we do mechanical breakdown with our teeth and our tongue. And the saliva also helps dissolve the taste of your food into your tongue. And so that food, right, once it enters your system, it's no longer really considered food in anatomy. The term itself, we refer to it as bolus. So as this bolus makes its way to the back of the oral cavity here, this is going to be considered your pharynx. Normal people, we call this typically throat. But in anatomy, it's important to distinguish the pharynx because there are three regions to it: nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx, named after the fact that nasopharynx is behind the nasal cavity, and the oropharynx is behind the oral cavity. And lastly, the larynx, and then the laryngopharynx is behind the larynx. And so if your bolus, right, your food has traveled through here now, it is going through the posterior pathway, not the anterior one. This is for gases. The epiglottis ensures that this seals shut and it doesn't allow anything to go into the larynx, but ensures that you successfully passage your bolus down into your esophagus. Now, if we translate this over, you can see that our esophagus continues down, 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 and then we have to sort of navigate around all these other external structures, and you'll see here's our esophagus once more. It came all the way from up here. And so do not confuse it for your descending aorta or the thoracic aorta. And so here we go. This is the esophagus. We travel down, and you'll see that we exit right here where we enter the stomach. Now, on the surface, the stomach has a few structures you need to know. First, we have a muscle here called the esophageal sphincter, which regulates entry from the esophagus into the stomach. You have another exit site, which is the pyloric sphincter, which regulates exit from the stomach into the small intestine. And some other external structures that we see is that up here, this part that sort of looks like a fungal cap, the top part is called the fundus. This region more to the center, underneath where the heart would sort of be, more to the midline, is called the cardiac region. And then the rest of it around this end is the body, everything else wrapping around. Now, where we have to draw the line is that when we get to this very end here, you'll see this number here, 486. This region is called the pyloric region. And that's why this is called the pyloric sphincter inside of that, to regulate what goes in and out, because of the name, the region name is pyloric region. Now, there's also a term called ruga on your list, but unfortunately none of these models open. But it's easy to understand that if you just look at your pictures, keep in mind that if you were to open up a stomach, in other words, take this and do a sagittal section, look inside, you would see this, and that would be the other half. The inside portion that wrinkles is ruga. That's what ruga is. And so now we move on to our small intestine. So when we look at our small intestine, right, we're going to have to get rid of our large one here in order to see the right order of things, but things might fall apart on me here. Yep, there it is. And so this stomach, again, would passage things from this, wrong way. The stomach would passage things, place it into the stomach, it will dissolve it through acids, and then once it's in the stomach, It's no longer even considered bolus. It's actually considered chyme, which is kind of a weird thing about digestive. But as it's going down your esophagus, it's bolus. The second it gets into your stomach, it becomes chyme. And so now you can see that as your food is being broken down by acids and also by smooth muscle contractions, you can see that finally we're going to enter the next stage, is preparing it to absorb what you just ate. So this structure here, 491, is going to be your duodenum. And you can see that even show you a little bit of the inside of that duodenum. And in this duodenum, what's going to occur is that you're going to have some assistance from your pancreas. So you may have to flip some pages here to find the pancreas section, but this is going to be your pancreas. And this one, 496, is going to be a pancreatic duct. The pancreas assists in digesting by secreting digestive enzymes through this pancreatic duct that eventually end up in the duodenum, which help break down your chyme or food in the chyme a little bit more. It also neutralizes the acid. The pancreas is great at releasing something called bicarbonate, which helps neutralize the acid that just came from your stomach, because your stomach runs at a pH about 1.5 to 3. So it could technically digest all of your internal organs. So you need this pancreas to help neutralize that acid. And so we also get another assistance from another accessory organ we refer to as the liver. And the liver sits right superficial to the stomach. And so this produces bile. And so when you look at it on this segment here, you'll see on the other side of the liver, you have this green structure referred to as gallbladder. And the gallbladder has these pathways to release what it stores, and that's bile. So the liver produces bile so that it eventually ends up in the duodenum to help break down fats. And so the gallbladder's function is to store some of that bile. So once it creates it, it stores it in the gallbladder, and then all you have to do is know the names of the pathway out. So if you're bile and you're stored in this little pouch, as you travel outwards, there's a name to this little entryway. That number there, it's a little scratched out and blurry, but that's going to be, I can't make out the number, but otherwise this is going to be your cystic duct. You'll also notice that there are two other ducts, one on this side and one on this side. These are hepatic ducts, and depending on if you're left or right, you're left or right. So if we orientate ourselves well here, this is going to be your left side, and then where my pinky is, the right side. So this is going to be the right hepatic duct, and this is going to be the left hepatic duct. And so the story continues that now as the food, right, our chyme has now been neutralized, and now the acid's absorbed, the more digestive assistance by the liver and the pancreas. Now things are going to travel into the jejunum. And the jejunum is this larger worm-like structure that inside of it, we're going to have the ability to absorb all the nutrients that we consume, and they're going to go into the mesentery. So when I started, keep in mind that there's mesenteries that lie on superficial, like right on top, and then there are mesenteries that lie in different levels of the digestive organs. And here you can see one of the mesenteries delivering blood and through those blood vessels. Another thing that's important to understand from this section too is that as your nutrition, your food, the molecules that you ingested have been broken down and they're traveling through this worm-like structure, right? They are being absorbed into these blood vessels. And so the jejunum's role is to ensure that you absorb those nutrients. And then finally, whatever you do not absorb, we finally reach the very end. And the very end of the small intestine is going to be the ileum, the very end. And you can even see another piece of it here, because this is where it would connect, that if it was connected here, the ileum would finally pass our nutrition into this ileum. Now, the next stop, we're done with the small intestine. Now, the next thing to keep track of is the large intestine. If you look at the large intestine, you can even tell it starts changing its look. It looks very different. You have this long muscle that goes along the length of the middle, and all these little regions, right? They look like sort of like regions that just get segmented there. And this first stop is whatever you couldn't digest is going to go into the cecum through what we refer to as the ileocecal valve. And this ileocecal valve regulates entry from the ileum into the large intestine. Right underneath it, you have your appendix. There are two known definitions for the appendix. One is that it stores very useful bacteria to help break down particular types of things that we consume. Another one is that it's vestigial and that we no longer actually use it or need it. And that's really the only two definitions I've ever encountered for it. And so when we look now, this larger worm-like one is your large intestine. This is going to be the descending one. As you can see, as it travels upwards, it's going to become your transverse colon. And then finally, as you go downwards, this is going to be descending colon. So ascending colon, transverse colon, I know I took it off, descending colon, and then finally this last part's going to be sigmoidal colon. Just this last part where you see that number there. And then if we removed here this urinary bladder, which we don't need today, we would encounter the rectum at the very end of that sigmoidal colon, and then the anus would be where defecation would occur from the exit point for it.